In the Colorado foothills, where mist drapes the pines and shadows prowl the edge of memory, Mike and Amy Henderson's peaceful retirement took an unexpected turn when a desperate cry pierced the morning mist. Drawn by the sounds, they ventured towards the tree line, unsure of what they might find. What they discovered was a sight that defied expectation. A tiny bobcat kit, abandoned and starving, stumbled toward them, defying every instinct that should have sent him fleeing. With no available space at the rehabilitation center, the vet allowed the bobcat to stay temporarily with the couple. Little did they know this fragile little bobcat was about to lead them down an unexpected path. A path that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the wild and the surprising bonds that can form when compassion meets desperation. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The morning mist clung to the pine trees like a shroud when Mike Henderson first heard the sound. It was barely past dawn, and he'd stepped out onto the deck of their cabin in the Colorado foothills with his coffee, expecting nothing more than the usual chorus of birds and the distant rustle of deer in the underbrush. Instead, a strange, mewling cry pierced the quiet morning air. "Amy," he called back into the house, his voice tight with concern. "Come out here, quick." Amy Henderson emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. At 57, she'd spent most of her life in Denver's bustling streets, managing a bookstore downtown. This cabin had been Mike's dream, a retirement haven where he could fish and she could finally write that novel she'd been planning for decades. They'd only moved in 6 months ago, and she was still adjusting to the isolation, the silence, and the way darkness fell like a heavy curtain each night. "What is it?" she asked, joining him at the deck railing. Mike pointed toward the edge of their property, where the manicured lawn gave way to wild forest. "Listen." The cry came again, desperate, plaintive, unlike anything Amy had heard before. It was somewhere between a kitten's mew and a child's sob, and it made her heart clench. "That's not a regular cat," Mike said, setting down his mug. "Too wild-sounding." They descended the deck stairs together, Amy clutching Mike's arm as they approached the tree line. The crying grew louder, more insistent. Then they saw him. A small, spotted creature stood on wobbling legs beside a fallen log, his oversized paws planted uncertainly in the pine needles. His ear tufts were just beginning to show, and his eyes, those distinctive amber eyes, were wide with fear and desperation. A baby bobcat, no more than a few weeks old, alone and crying for help. "Oh, Mike," Amy breathed. "He's just a baby." The kit noticed them and instead of running, took a tentative step forward. His legs trembled with the effort, and Amy realized with a shock that he was actually approaching them, something completely contrary to everything she'd read about wild animals in the stack of Colorado wildlife guides Mike had bought her. "We need to call someone," Mike said, though he didn't move, transfixed by the sight of the tiny predator stumbling toward them. "Fish and wildlife, maybe?" Amy nodded, but she couldn't take her eyes off the kit. He was so small, so vulnerable. Where was his mother? Bobcat mothers were fiercely protective. She would never leave her baby exposed like this unless... The kit collapsed, his legs giving out. He lay in the pine needles, sides heaving, that heartbreaking cry now reduced to exhausted whimpers. "Go call," Amy said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I'll stay with him." Mike hesitated. "Amy, it's a wild animal. It could have rabies or... Look at him, Mike. He's starving. He's been abandoned. Just go make the call." As Mike hurried back to the house, Amy slowly lowered herself to sit cross-legged a few feet from the kit. She didn't try to touch him, just sat quietly, speaking in low, soothing tones. "It's okay, little one. We're going to help you. Where's your mama, How long have you been out here all alone?" The kit's amber eyes fixed on her face. There was intelligence there, she thought, and something else? Trust, perhaps, or simply the recognition that she represented his only chance at survival. Dr. Patricia Walters from the Colorado Wildlife Rehabilitation Center arrived 2 hours later, by which time Amy had managed to coax the kit to drink some water from a shallow dish she'd placed nearby. The veterinarian was a compact woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and hands that moved with practiced gentleness as she examined the kit. "Male, about 4 weeks old," she announced, carefully checking his teeth and paws. "Dehydrated, malnourished, but no obvious injuries. No sign of the mother?" "We looked," Mike said. "Searched the whole area. No tracks, no den that we could find." Dr. Walters nodded grimly. "Could be she was killed. Hit by a car, maybe, or taken by a larger predator. Could be she abandoned him because he was sick, though he seems healthy enough now. Sometimes first-time mothers panic and leave their kits." "What happens to him now?" Amy asked, watching as the vet gently placed the kit in a carrier. "Well, that's the problem." Dr. Walters sighed, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "We're completely full at the center. It's been a bad year. Lots of orphans, not enough space or volunteers. Normally, I'd take him anyway, but..." She looked between Amy and Mike, seeming to weigh something in her mind. "You said he approached you?" "Walked right up to us," Mike confirmed. "Well, stumbled more like..." "That's highly unusual. Bobcat kits are hardwired to avoid humans. The fact that he sought you out..." Dr. Walters paused. "Look, this is unconventional, but would you consider fostering him, just temporarily until we have space at the center?" Amy felt her heart skip. "Us? But we don't know anything about raising a bobcat." "I'd teach you everything. You'd need to build a proper enclosure, follow strict protocols. He's not a pet. The goal would always be released back into the wild. But you have the space here, you're isolated enough that he wouldn't become too habituated to human activity, and frankly..." She glanced at the kit, who had curled up in the carrier and was watching Amy with those striking eyes. "He seems to trust you. That's not nothing." Amy looked at Mike, who shrugged. "Your call," he said. "You're the one who's home all day." It was a moment that would change everything. Amy thought of her quiet days, her unwritten novel, her comfortable routine. Then she looked at the kit, so small, so alone in the world, and heard herself say, "Tell me what I need to know." Dr. Walters smiled. "First things first, he needs a name. Nothing too cute or humanizing. Something that reminds you he's wild." Amy studied the kit's alert expression, the way his ears swiveled to catch every sound despite his exhaustion. "Scout," she said. "We'll call him Scout." The next weeks were a blur of construction, feeding schedules, and sleepless nights. Mike, handy with tools from his years as a contractor, built a large outdoor enclosure against the side of their garage. It was 20 feet by 30 feet, with climbing structures made from fallen trees, a small shelter lined with straw, and double-fenced walls that went 2 feet into the ground to prevent digging escapes. "This is nicer than some apartments I've lived in," Mike joked, installing the final security latch on the gate. Amy had thrown herself into research with the same intensity she'd once devoted to ordering books for her store. She learned that bobcats couldn't digest cow's milk, that they needed a specific formula supplemented with vitamins. She learned to prepare his food wearing gloves to minimize human scent transfer, to never speak baby talk or treat him like a house cat. But the hardest lesson was emotional distance. "You have to remember," Dr. Walters reminded her during one of her weekly check-ins, "he's not your pet. Every interaction should be purposeful. Feed him, clean his enclosure, monitor his health, but don't cuddle. Don't play with him like you would a domestic animal. His life depends on maintaining his wild instincts." It was easier said than done. Those first nights, when Scout cried pitifully in his enclosure, Amy could barely stand it. She'd sit on the deck, listening to his calls, her fingers white-knuckled around a mug of tea. Mike would find her there at midnight, at 2 in the morning, at dawn. "This is killing you," he said one night, draping a blanket around her shoulders. "He's scared," she whispered. "He's just a baby, and he's all alone out there." Mike was quiet for a moment. Then, "So don't leave him alone." That's how Amy ended up sleeping in a tent beside Scout's enclosure. She told herself it was just for a few nights, just until he adjusted. She maintained the boundaries, never entering the enclosure at night, never responding to his cries with comfort. But her presence seemed to calm him. Through the tent walls, she could hear his breathing slow, his restless pacing settle into sleep. A month passed, then 2. Scout grew with astonishing speed, his spots fading as his coat became more uniform. His awkward stumbling transformed into the liquid grace characteristic of his species. He learned to hunt the live mice Dr. Walters brought. Amy had to leave for those feedings, unable to watch. He climbed the structures Mike had built, sharpened his claws on the logs, and practiced the silent stalking that would one day make him an apex predator in these mountains. But he never forgot Amy. When she approached with his food, he would chirp. A unique vocalization she learned was reserved for mothers and kits. He would follow her movements along the fence line, matching her pace precisely. Sometimes, when she sat quietly reading in a chair near the enclosure, he would settle in the corresponding spot on his side of the fence, content just to be near her. "You're getting attached," Mike warned one evening, watching Amy prepare Scout's dinner with meticulous care. "I'm not," she insisted, but they both knew it was a lie. The crisis came when Scout was 4 months old. Dr. Walters arrived for her weekly visit to find Amy inside the enclosure. Scout pressed against her leg while she stroked his fur. "Amy!" The vet's sharp voice made them both jump. "What are you doing?" Shame flooded Amy's face as she quickly exited the enclosure. "He seemed lonely. I just thought..." "You can't think. You have to follow the protocols." Dr. Walters' expression softened slightly. "I know it's hard. Believe me, I've been doing this for 30 years and it never gets easier. But if he becomes too comfortable with humans, he won't survive in the wild. Bobcats who approach humans get shot, Amy. Is that what you want for him?" That night, Amy cried into Mike's shoulder. "I'm failing him. I'm going to get him killed because I can't keep my distance." "You're not failing him," Mike said firmly. "You saved his life. Now you just need to save it again by letting him be what he is." From that day forward, Amy recommitted to the protocols. She wore different clothes for feeding to minimize scent association. She varied feeding times to prevent routine dependence. She used tools to place food rather than hand feeding. It was agony, watching Scout's confusion when she no longer responded to his chirps, seeing him pace the fence line looking for the companion who had withdrawn. But it worked. Slowly, Scout began to rely more on instinct than human interaction. he became warier, more independent. When Dr. Walters brought a road-killed deer for him to practice on, another feeding Amy couldn't watch, he processed it with the efficiency of a wild predator. At 6 months, it was time for the next phase. Mike modified a section of the enclosure fence to include a guillotine door, a sliding panel that could be raised to allow Scout to come and go as he pleased while still having the security of returning to familiar territory. The first time Amy raised that door, her hands shook. "You sure about this?" Mike asked. "Once he goes, he might not come back." "That's the point," Amy said, though her voice was thick with unshed tears. Scout approached the opening cautiously, his body low, every sense alert. He sniffed the edges of the door, placed one paw tentatively outside, then withdrew. For an hour, he investigated this new development, while Amy and Mike watched from the kitchen window. Then, as the sun began to set, Scout slipped through the opening and melted into the forest. Amy didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window, watching the empty enclosure, starting at every sound. Mike brought her coffee, sandwiches she didn't eat, blankets she didn't need. "He's doing what he's supposed to do," he reminded her gently. "I know," she whispered. "That doesn't make it easier." At dawn, her heart leapt. A familiar form emerged from the tree line. Scout, carrying a freshly killed rabbit in his jaws. He slipped back through the guillotine door and proceeded to eat his catch in his favorite spot under the climbing structure. This became the pattern. Scout would leave at dusk, hunt through the night, and return by dawn. Sometimes he'd be gone for 2 or 3 days, and Amy would pace the house like a worried parent. But he always came back, drawn by the safety of the enclosure and, Amy suspected, by the connection they'd forged in those early months. The real test came in winter. Colorado winters are brutal, and Amy worried constantly about Scout's ability to find food in the deep snow. She was tempted to supplement his diet, but Dr. Walters was firm. "He needs to learn to hunt in all conditions. Wild bobcats don't have backup feeders." Amy watched him adapt with a mixture of pride and anxiety. His coat grew thick and luxurious. His paws, already large, seemed to expand even more, acting like snowshoes. He learned to hunt by sound, pinpointing mice under feet of snow and diving headfirst to catch them. One terrible night in January, a blizzard raged through the mountains. Amy hadn't seen Scout in 3 days, and the storm made it impossible to even check the enclosure. She stood at the window, peering into the white chaos, worry eating at her insides. "He's found shelter," Mike assured her. "He's smart. He knows these woods better than we do now." But Amy couldn't shake her fear. What if he was injured? Trapped? What if he'd finally roamed too far and couldn't find his way back? On the 4th morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of snow. Amy struggled through the drifts to Scout's enclosure and found him there, curled in his shelter, sleeping peacefully. Relief flooded through her so intensely that she had to sit down in the snow. As winter gave way to spring, Scout's visits became less frequent. He was ranging farther, establishing territory, becoming the wild creature he was meant to be. Amy learned to find joy in the occasional glimpses, a flash of spotted fur in the underbrush, tracks in the mud by the stream, the remains of a kill that showed he was thriving. Then came the day that changed everything again. Amy was reading on the deck when she heard it, that familiar chirp she hadn't heard in months. She looked up to see Scout at the edge of the forest, and her heart stopped. He was limping. His right rear leg dragged uselessly, and there was blood on his fur. He made it to the base of the deck stairs before collapsing, his sides heaving. "Mike!" Amy screamed, rushing down the stairs. Protocol be damned. Her boy was hurt. She approached slowly, speaking in the same soothing tones she'd used when he was a kid. "Hey, Scout, it's okay. I'm here. What happened to you?" Scout's amber eyes tracked her movement, and he made no move to flee when she knelt beside him. Up close, she could see the wound, deep punctures in his hip and thigh, already showing signs of infection. "Coyotes," Mike said grimly, joining them. "Or maybe another bobcat. Territory dispute." They managed to coax Scout into a large dog carrier Mike retrieved from the garage. The fact that he allowed it spoke volumes about his condition. Amy called Dr. Walters, her voice shaking. "Bring him in immediately," the vet said. "If it's infected, we don't have much time." The next hours were a blur. Dr. Walters sedated Scout and cleaned the wounds, which were indeed from another bobcat, an adult male by the size of the bite marks. She administered antibiotics and pain medication, stitched the worst of the damage. "He's lucky," she told Amy and Mike in the waiting room. "No major vessels hit, no bone damage, but there's significant muscle trauma. Recovery will take weeks, maybe months." "What does that mean for his release?" Amy asked, though she already suspected the answer. Dr. Walters sighed. "It complicates things. He'll need physical therapy to regain full use of that leg. He'll be dependent on human care during recovery. All that wild instinct we worked so hard to preserve, we might be undoing it." Amy felt tears prick her eyes. After everything, to have it end like this. "There is another option," Dr. Walters continued slowly. "He clearly still trusts you, but he's also proven he can survive in the wild. You could manage his recovery at home, in his familiar environment. Minimize human contact except for medical care. It's unconventional, but then Scout's always been an unconventional case." So Scout came home. Mike reinforced a section of the original enclosure to serve as a recovery space. Smaller, to limit movement, but with familiar scents and sights. Amy became a bobcat physical therapist, following Dr. Walters' detailed instructions for massage and range of motion exercises. It was during these sessions that their bond, never truly broken, deepened into something profound. Scout would lie still for the treatments, his eyes fixed on Amy's face, occasionally releasing that chirping vocalization from his kithood. She found herself talking to him, not baby talk, but real conversation about her days, her unfinished novel, her fears for his future. "You're going to get better," she told him one afternoon, gently manipulating his injured leg. "You're going to run and hunt and claim your territory again. And maybe you'll find a mate, have kids of your own. Wouldn't that be something?" Scout blinked slowly at her. What she'd learned was a sign of trust and contentment in cats. Progress was slow but steady. First, Scout began bearing weight on the leg. Then, tentative steps. Mike built increasingly challenging obstacles in the recovery pen, and Scout attacked them with determination that made Amy's heart swell with pride. After 2 months, Dr. Walters declared him ready for release. Again. "His muscle tone is good. The leg is strong. He's young and healthy. He should be fine." She paused, studying Amy's face. "The question is, are you ready?" Amy thought she was. She'd done this before, after all. But when the morning came to open the enclosure door, she found herself hesitating. What if he gets hurt again? What if the other bobcat is still out there? Then he'll handle it. Mike said gently, like wild animals have been doing for millions of years. You can't protect him forever, Amy. She knew he was right. With a deep breath, she opened the door. Scout didn't leave immediately. He spent the day lounging in the enclosure, testing his leg with occasional stretches and short sprints. As dusk fell, he finally approached the opening. He paused at the threshold and looked back at Amy, who watched from the deck. For a long moment, they regarded each other. The city woman who'd learned to love the wild, and the wild creature who'd learned to trust a human. Then Scout chirped once, a clear farewell, and disappeared into the forest. This time, Amy didn't stay up all night worrying. She knew he'd be all right. Scout's recovery marked a turning point. He still returned occasionally, sometimes to the enclosure, sometimes just passing through the yard. But he was truly wild now. Amy would catch glimpses of him marking territory, once saw him in a standoff with a coyote that he won handily. In his second winter, she spotted him with a female bobcat, and her heart soared. But the most remarkable change was in Amy herself. The woman who'd once been nervous about the darkness and isolation of mountain life now walked the forest paths with confidence. She'd started a blog about her experience with Scout, which had grown into a book, not the novel she'd planned, but something more meaningful. She volunteered with Dr. Walters at the rehabilitation center, helping other orphaned wildlife. And the animals knew. It started small. The deer who didn't flee when she approached, the foxes who hunted mice in plain view, the great horned owl who took to roosting in the pine tree outside her window. Word seemed to have spread through the forest that this human could be trusted. "You're like some Disney princess," Mike teased, watching a chipmunk eat seeds from Amy's outstretched hand. "What's next? Are birds going to start doing your laundry?" Amy laughed, but she understood what had happened. Scout had given her a gift more precious than his trust. He'd taught her to see the natural world not as something separate and frightening, but as a community she was part of. Now, 2.5 years after that first desperate cry in the morning mist, Amy stood on her deck in the pre-dawn darkness. She knew Scout was out there. She'd found his tracks by the stream yesterday, seen the remains of a rabbit he'd caught. He was thriving, living the life he was meant to live. A movement in the shadows caught her eye. Scout emerged from the forest, padding silently across the lawn. He was magnificent in his maturity. Muscular, glossy-coated, every inch the apex predator. He paused at the base of the deck, looking up at her. Amy didn't speak, didn't move. After a moment, Scout chirped. That special vocalization she'd never heard him use with any other human or animal. She chirped back, a poor imitation, but one that made his ears swivel forward with interest. He turned to go, then paused. From the forest emerged another form, the female bobcat Amy had glimpsed before. Behind her, tumbling and play-fighting, came 2 kits. Amy's hand flew to her mouth. Scout had brought his family to meet her. They didn't stay long. Wild creatures seldom do. But for those few precious moments, Amy was granted a glimpse into Scout's wild life. The kits wrestled in the grass while their parents watched, alert but unafraid. Then, at some invisible signal, the family melted back into the forest. Amy stood on the deck long after they'd gone, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, but of pure joy. Scout hadn't just survived. He'd thrived. He'd found a mate, raised a family, claimed his place in the mountain ecosystem. And yet he'd remembered her, honored their bond by sharing this moment. Mike found her there as the sun rose, painting the mountains gold and rose. "You okay?" he asked, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. More than okay, Amy said, leaning into his warmth. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And she was. The city woman who'd once feared the wilderness had found her place in it, not as an intruder, but as a participant, connected by bonds of trust and respect to the wild hearts that shared her mountain home. Scout had been her teacher, her challenge, her gift. In saving him, she'd discovered a part of herself she never knew existed. As the morning light strengthened, Amy heard it again. Distant now, but unmistakable. Scout's chirp, carrying on the mountain air, wild and free and perfect. She smiled, wiped her tears, and chirped back one last time. Then she went inside to write it all down, knowing that some stories are too precious not to share, and some bonds too profound to ever truly break. In the years that followed, Amy would see Scout occasionally, a flash of spotted fur in the underbrush, tracks in fresh snow, the remains of a successful hunt. Each sighting was a gift, a reminder of the extraordinary trust they'd shared. She knew that someday the sightings would stop, that Scout would move on or meet the fate of all wild things. But that didn't diminish what they'd shared. She'd learned that love doesn't always mean holding tight. Sometimes it means opening your hands and letting go, trusting that what you've given will help something beautiful survive in the world. And in the end, that might be the most profound love of all, the kind that sets you free.